Today we're going to take a look at a new lighting technique that I've seen being used in a few fiction shows, but also in documentary interview setups. And as I was doing research for my new course, the 10 Steps to Cinematic Interviews, which you can access in the link below, I came across this type of lighting setup, and so I wanted to try it out myself. We're going to start out by actually looking at a documentary that uses this setup, and then I'm going to go in the field and try to do it myself. The lighting technique that I'm talking about is actually having a backlight that is visible in the frame, where you'll see this beam of light hitting the back of a character or an interview subject. Backlighting is not something that's unusual, it's used all the time, but usually the problem with backlighting, or the struggle for a production, is to actually hide that backlight because it is behind the subject that the camera is shooting, as it would be here. And instead, in shows like The Bear and on the interview samples that I'm going to be breaking down, they decided to put the light right in frame. So you can see the light in the actual interview frame, which is something a little unusual, a little unique, but I think it actually looks pretty cool. So let's go ahead and break this interview lighting technique down in The Mission, which is a documentary on the National Geographic Channel, and then we're gonna go into the field and try it out ourselves. So The Mission is on National Geographic Channel. You can watch it. It came out last year, I believe. And right here we can see pretty early on in the film, this interview setup pops up. And let me just move it along a little bit further so you can see his face. And as you can see right here with his giant arrows pointing, that there is a giant beam of light in the shot coming through a window. So it could be represented as the sun, but obviously it's not, because this interview probably lasted a few hours, and so the light is always consistently there. There is this beam of light that is visible, and it's creating these really nice shadows on the ground, as well as the beam of light's coming across it. And then on our actual subject's face, it's just giving them a nice little backlight and rim light sort of right here on their right shoulder. But you can also see while watching this that the interview setup still follows a lot of the great principles of great documentary cinematography, where you're having really nice shadow detail on one side of the character's face. Right here, it looks like it's broadside lighting because he's looking down and reading, but if he was looking at character, he actually would be looking to the left side of screen, which would create sort of a reverse key effect. And then the backlight is separating him from the background. But as we said before, the light's actually in the shot, which is interesting. Now let's take a look at another example from The Mission as well, because they use this in almost all the interviews they do. There are a few locations where they don't have this setup, and it's a more standard interview setup, but most of the interviews have some backlight visible in the frame. All right, so here's another example. And again, as we can see through the window, a light that's actually going through the window and visible in the frame, in the shot itself. And I actually really like this interview setup. I think shooting in bedrooms is always very difficult. It's just hard to make people sitting on a bed in an interview look natural and not strange. But here they've done a really nice job. It definitely helps that there's quite a bit of depth in this room. So there's a lot of space behind the interviewee, as we can see back here. And with this light still being visible, we're also getting that background separation of having that light along her shoulder and along the side of her hair. But in general, the rest of the interview setup is a fairly just nice cinematic looking interview, meaning we have our key light probably somewhere over here off frame, and that's lighting her and then creating some shadow details on this side of her frame. So if we didn't have the beam of light beaming through the window, the interview would still look great, but it just has a nice little touch with that light because it just adds something a little extra and a little different for this particular film. And this film is all about a person who went out on a mission to make contact with one of the last tribes in the world who don't have any contacts with humans. And so there is this religious theme throughout the film, and sort of an omnipresent idea of God and faith. And so I think in that regard, having sort of that beam of light, maybe that's what the cinematographer was thinking. I don't know, I'll have to ask him if I ever meet him. You know, it could be used for something like that. Maybe that's what that's representing, that light actually in the frame and in the interview shot could be a representation of some omnipresent presence. While I was making my newest course, the 10 Aspects of Cinematic Interviews, I wanted to try out this frame myself. I wanted to use this beam of light and just see if I would ever actually use it in any of my work. And so we're gonna go out in the field now to show you a video from that course, and then you can decide for yourself if it's something that maybe you would use in your interview setups. So the first step is to obviously find your frame. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And I want to have a really wide angle this time. So I'm going to stay somewhere between 24 and 35 millimeters. And I actually really like the look of when an interviewee is sitting at a table. It's a little more relaxed. And so I think I might try and do that right here on this corner table. And I also obviously need some windows in the frame to test out that beam of light that acts as a backlight that's coming through the window and giving us a really unique visual element. So we're gonna probably put someone right here at this table and then shoot a light through that window. And while I usually wouldn't set my key light opposite of these big panel windows, I do like the angle of that shot a lot more than perhaps having someone look right to left in frame. And so I'm going to try and just bring in a big negative fill on this side of our interviewee to both block the light and also create some deeper shadows. And then we'll set up a really soft light source on this side here. I think we're gonna settle in on somewhere right here for the interview setup. So we got a lot of production designing to do in the background, it looks like, as well. And I'm gonna stay at 35mm and also go a little bit lower, just give us a little bit more of a dramatic look. And keeping those big barn doors with those big open windows in the frame, because that's where we're gonna have our beam of light coming in. All right, so we have cleaned up some of our production design in the background. We got Ollie sitting in, who will be our interviewee about something, some subject to be named. And so the next stage was we're going to put up a big soft key light, because a lot of the interviews I've seen that have tried this trend, it still employs a really soft reverse key. And so we're going to do that. So the nice thing about just using a shower curtain you can buy at any home goods store is that they're usually very big for a light source, and they still diffuse light pretty well. So we'll try this first, and then we'll put on the actual filmmaking tool of the scrim cloth to see if there's a big difference, and if there's not, then you can always just go and grab a shower curtain. Diffusion. So we got a nice bright light. It's working well, it looks nice and soft, so the shower curtain is working pretty well. There's maybe a little too much spill for my taste. I might put on a reflector to focus the light a little bit more, or bounce it into an umbrella. So first I'm gonna try to bounce an umbrella, create a book light, see if we can get the light even softer, and then we'll see how that one looks. Otherwise we get bored. I'm going to employ a version of the book light, and a book light is just the concept where you shoot your light off of a surface that reflects the light back towards your subject, and then it goes through another form of diffusion. So it's sort of a doubly diffuse with a bounce, and it just helps soften the light even further. It basically creates more distance between the light and your interviewee without actually having to move the light any further away. All right, striking the light again. You just bounce it off the umbrella, back to the shower curtain, softens the light a little bit. And it's looking good right now. Oh no, perfect. All right, so yeah, you would just look at me just to make sure. So I'm just gonna sit in where my interviewer would be sitting, perhaps me. And this is just to make sure that our interviewee has the eye light that we want, just so we can see that twinkle in his eye. And the book light's doing great in that regard. There's a real nice eye light. All right, now that we have a nice soft key light, we're now going to add our backlight just to see how that will look. And then once we do that, we'll start controlling some other light, maybe blocking out a little bit of the light coming from these other windows, and see if we can get sort of that really unique cinematic look that we're going for. So at the same time of blocking some light, I'm going to also add in what will be negative fill on the shadow side of Ollie's face. And so that should just help create some shape. And right now it's pretty bright in here, so just creating a little bit more dimension, especially on our interviewee. Ooh, already that's looking much, much better. Also gonna do some slight reframing at this stage, just because I feel like we could be a little closer and a little wider, just to get a little bit more of a dramatic look. Also eliminating a few different unwanted elements that are in the frame. All right, so for our beam of light coming through the window, I'm going to be using this aperture 60D. And the nice feature of this light is it has a beam angle that you can tighten or widen, and so that'll give us some ability to sort of see what looks best, whether it's a really direct beam angle or a little bit more spread. Kind of feels like it. All right, nice. I'm gonna use this window here because it'll make the frame feel a little more balanced than that other window. And so we're gonna power this up. And then I'm gonna turn it up pretty bright because I think to have any effect, The 60-watt light needs to be pretty bright. And then I'm gonna put the beam angle a little bit wider to start, and then maybe we'll zoom it in a little bit. Also might put it a little further back from the wall just so I could potentially get the shadow detail of the different frames within the window itself. So already it's having a nice effect. You can definitely see it. It's pretty bright, but it may not be bright enough. We want this to act as a hair light as well as sort of a visual element, and so I want to make sure I actually hit the back of Ollie's head to give him that sort of rim light, which will be nice. Let's see. It's kind of hard to see where it's landing. Now it's actually hitting him, so that's good. And so now maybe we can widen our beam angle a little bit to both diffuse it, but also give us a nicer background element. But because of the angle of the light, we're getting probably a little too much on his nose. And so maybe I'll move it to the other window, or just move it over to this side of the window, just so it's a little bit more directly on his hair. So we're just trying to find where it looks the best from a visual standpoint, but also on Ollie. And then maybe we'll just expand the spread of this light a little bit. So there's a nice strong backlight. You can really see the light beaming through the window, so we have that effect. And I'm gonna add a few more elements just to give him a little bit more of a backlight to separate him from the brick in the background, and then maybe block a little bit more light, but otherwise, this is looking pretty good. All right, so hanging some blackout curtains on the outside of this door to block out this big green line coming through here. And on the outside, obviously, because I actually really like the wood, it looks good as a background. If you just have black cloth hanging, it'll be fairly ugly. So putting it on the outside, and then I saw this little light bulb here, so I thought that might be interesting as a background element. And it actually is quite soft and has a nice color temperature to it. Everything else that's coming through the windows, our light coming through the window, our key light are all daylight balanced. And so having a warmer 3000 Kelvin-ish light bulb in the background just gives that extra color differentiation, which I love. So we have our light coming through the window, and it's doing a little bit on our interviewee's hair and shoulders, but I would love to just have him pop off the background a little bit more. So I'm gonna add one more light on the background, just to give us that dreamy look that we're going for, because I think if you are doing this type of setup where you have a beam of light coming through, it has that sort of airy, natural feel. So a little bit more of a halo glow around our subject, I think works in this scenario. And just gives them a little bit more of a glow. And at 90%, it's way too intense, creating too much of sort of a weird halo effect. And so I'm just gonna watch my monitor and dial it into my liking. So 50% starting to look a little too intense. And so I think dialing it back down to around that 30% area is perfect, because it still feels like it's coming from that other light source. And it's making it look really, really nice. So I'm liking the way that's looking. I actually would love to be wider somewhere in here, but as we can see in the top left of the screen, the garage door rails are very bright and distracting, and it would take a lot more grip work to actually deaden those out and not make them so distracting. So we're just gonna crop them out by just either zooming in a little bit or moving the camera. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit just to get a little bit more compression, and we're still at a pretty wide angle look of 35 millimeters, which is pretty cool. I might just move my key light down just a touch, just to get a little bit of a stronger eye light. Oh, you know what would make this really nice? So a final touch before we roll, because of the light beaming through in different angles, having a little bit of haze to create some atmosphere would be really nice in here. And so that's our last step. So I'm gonna put a little bit of fog, haze in the background, and then we'll be ready to do it. So our final touch on this interview setup is using this fogger, which will do a little bit of haze in the room. And that does a few things for us. It just creates a little more atmosphere, but it also diffuses the light. So we have a couple harsher backlights beaming on our subject. And so having a diffuser will give those lights a little bit more of a diffused, dreamy look, which is exactly what we're going for. So wait for this bad boy to heat up, and then we will add some atmosphere. I want to spread it around the room. Whoa. We don't want this necessarily crowding our subject. We just kind of want the background. So go ahead and sort of push it around the room. We want that to dissipate quite a bit before we roll. We'll just wait for that moment, and then we'll hit it. So taking Ollie's spot to talk about this interview setup, We have a big soft source over here to my left, which is a book light. It's a G-Yun B500 bouncing into an umbrella and coming back through a shower curtain that you could buy at any home goods store or on Amazon. And then behind me, we have a big beam of light. It's an aperture 60D. And I think it works pretty well here. It creates this sort of omniscient, hazy, natural feel that could be right for certain projects. One project that used it extensively is the Mission on National Geographic, and that was a lot about religion and sort of the search for meaning. And so having a big beam of light kind of behind to sort of create that atmosphere might work for a story like that. And that backlight coming through is doing quite a bit on the side of my face and a little bit on my shoulders and on the table, but I wanted to enhance it a little bit more by creating more background separation with another backlight, which is directly behind me now and hitting the back of my shoulders and creating more of a halo glow effect, which I think works pretty well. And then we added just a little bit of haze. It took a little while for it to dissipate until it was at the right amount to give us a little bit more atmosphere without feeling like the whole building's on fire. We also did a ton of production design, put up a big black cloth right here to my right to give some negative fill and also block some unwanted light. And this is the final result. If you are doing a project where this fits the story and it feels like it could be part of the story to have this type of atmosphere and setup, then you should try it out in your own videos. For me personally, it looks better than I thought it would when I set out to start doing it. And so I could see myself using this in certain respects, especially branded content, commercial pieces, maybe things that are a little bit more upbeat or need that sort of omniscient look through the window. So this is something you can add to your repertoire, try it out. You can do it in your own house by just putting a light through a window and set up an interview in the living room and try it out on a job and see if it works for you. And if not, you can just move on to the next video and we'll try something else out. All right, see you in the next interview setup. So I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. Hopefully you found it helpful and maybe just found some techniques that maybe you yourself would use in one of your interview setups. And would the beam of lights idea and having a visible backlight in frame be something that you would use in your interview setups? Let me know in the comments below. And if you would like to see more from this course, you can check out the link in the description for the 10 Steps to Cinematic Interviews course just launched. So check it out and get 25% off through the month of November.